What's up, guys? Wanted to hop on here to discuss the Tuesday Cardinals roster moves, the news that dropped earlier this afternoon. Some moving and shaking going on as the Cardinals look to avoid falling further and further behind in the wild card race. These moves coming ahead of their series against the Brewers, I should say. Jordan Walker optioned back to Memphis. Brenden Crawford, unconditional release. And then the two recalls, it's Matt Carpenter from the injured list. It's Luke and Baker from AAA. Let's talk about the reasoning behind these moves, why they're happening now, and kind of where it leaves the Cardinals. We'll start with Jordan Walker because that's been the more recent hot button topic. The Crawford thing, I think a lot of people were maybe expecting to see at any given time over the previous weeks and months, as he just had not really panned out offensively for the Cardinals and was kind of boxed into a pretty niche role with the team. But we'll start with Walker. Here's my thoughts on this. It never made sense to have Jordan Walker come up to the big league club as a left-handed platoon option. We've been over and over and over this. I played the quotes from the Sunday morning sit down with Tom Ackerman from Ollie Marmol and then from John Mozeliak on a recent episode of b-schaeff Daily. So you guys could hear the notion that there just did not seem to really be synergy as far as this decision was concerned. And it's one that it seemed like, if you were listening to the way that Mozeliak hinted at the end, that if they weren't going to see everyday opportunities for Jordan Walker coming up soon with the many, many, many right-handed pitchers the Cardinals are scheduled to face, then it was maybe going to be a situation where they needed to send him back down. This whole saga has been kind of embarrassing for the Cardinals, and the way that they handled it was wrong. It just was. To have a young, regarded prospect like Jordan Walker, a young player who has been struggling this season, and you need to kind of feed into his triumphs when he has them and give him opportunities to excel. He had his first instance of the season where he hit homers in back-to-back games. This was last weekend, not a couple of days ago, but the prior weekend. And the Cardinals then immediately call him up because Matt Carpenter's going on the injured list. That's all well and good, but they call him up knowing that they aren't necessarily going to use him a lot. Use him in this very niche role designed to improve the team's standing against left-handed pitching, which is something the Cardinals do need. I don't dispute that. And I understand that that's something that they've been lacking, and it would help them to have a player in their organization that could have been somebody who was either an outfielder or a second baseman, because those are the two positions that you conceivably could have taken a left-handed hitter out of the lineup and plugged in a righty into the daily lineup against left-handed starters and actually given the Cardinals a boost in that regard, right? But Jordan Walker, not only is he not destined for being a great candidate to fill that role because of his reverse splits over the past couple of years, he's a guy who has not actually excelled against lefties relative to his performance against righties. But that doesn't necessarily have to matter if the Cardinals think that Walker can give them more against lefty starters than the likes of Nootbaar or Burleson or those guys, Gorman, that are in the lineup that he would effectively be replacing depending on who plays where positionally defensively. So from that stance, it was a very niche role, and it was for a minimal gain to potentially give them a slight 1% or 2% gain on a given day and win a game this year, because the Cardinals are trying to avoid back-to-back losing seasons for the first time since the late 1950s in non-strike shortened campaigns. So the field staff and the manager and the coaches and the players are urgently trying to not lose games. They're trying to find any edge that they can, which is understandable. The problem, though, is to allow for that to be prioritized, as John Mozeliak did, over the development of Jordan Walker is shameful. He just starts to find his footing and then comes up and gets 12 plate appearances over the course of a little more than a week and goes 1 for 11, basically negating all of the progress he had made, which maybe that part's not true. Maybe Jordan Walker goes back down. He has success right away again and can basically pick up where he left off. That's got to be the hope if you're the Cardinals. It was a little bit more than a week period of time where they did a move that just didn't make any sense, but they pulled the plug on it quickly. He's got to play. Wherever he is, he's got to play, and that was true if he was going to be in the minors. It's true if he's going to be in the big league roster, and you're just going to have to find a way to start him against right-handed pitching. We know why Ollie Marmol was reluctant and hesitant to do that, because he has more faith in some of the guys like Lars Nootbaar that would be getting those daily opportunities instead. So that left Walker in a very unfortunate position through no fault of his own, right as he had started to turn the corner with the types of swings he was taking in Memphis. So for all the people that have claimed, and we've talked about, Mark DeRosa saying behind the scenes at MLB Network, there are a lot of former MLB players that believe the Cardinals have botched Jordan Walker's development with the way that they have handled him. And that was before all of this over the past week has taken place. So at this point, it would be very difficult to argue anything to the contrary. The Cardinals are not handling Walker to the best of their abilities. Well, maybe they are to the best of their abilities, but to the best of the abilities of a sensible front office, I don't think that you can make that claim at this point. They are that they're making decisions that, as I put in the previous video, they have objectives on Jordan Walker that were in conflicting interests. And now we see the way that plays out. He's optioned back to Memphis. Pretty simple. Matt Carpenter comes back up. It was just a short stint on the injured list for him with the back issue, and so he's back. That's pretty self-explanatory. Let's talk, though, about the Brenden Crawford portion of this conversation, because he does get released by the Cardinals today in a move that feels like it was a long time coming, right? And it's not like you always heard me out front talking about, hey, this guy who's currently on the team that I cover should lose his job. That's not really my style. It wouldn't be a respectful way to go about it. However, you could probably tell in the tone of the way I talked about that role in the bench. My key phrase has been the bench is lacking utility. There's not a lot of utility to Ollie Marmol's bench, and Brenden Crawford was a big reason for that. A left-handed bat who couldn't hitting 169 with a 263 on base and a 282 slug for a 544 OPS and an OPS plus of 53. That means he's 47% below league average as a hitter this season. There's no utility to that. He can only play really shortstop and not even all that effectively, and just did not bring anything to the table in terms of on the field. I understand that there's a clubhouse presence, but John Mozeliak was actually pretty specific back in February when they signed him, or March, whenever it was, when they signed him, saying, well, this wasn't really we need more of a veteran leadership voice. This was, we need a backup shortstop. If you recall at the time, Mason Wynn was dealing with back issues in spring. He missed several days of activities while I was down there in spring, and then they slowly began to ramp him back up. As we have seen this season, Ollie Marmol has taken extra care, especially early in the year, to try to buy him different levels of off days and back-to-back off days. When the team has a day off, they'll get one for Mason on either side of that team off day to try and manage an ailment that was very real that he was going through in spring, and then it cropped up a couple of times, as you guys will recall, earlier this season. So that was the reason for Brenden Crawford, right? They felt we don't have another shortstop in the organization, especially as Tommy Edman's situation continued to be derailed, and it kept taking longer and longer to believe that he could return to health and to prominence for this team. They felt like they needed somebody like Crawford. They arguably overpaid for it for a couple of $1 million, but that was the same week that guys like Ahmed Rosario and Tim Anderson and Nick Ahmed were signing like crazy. That the veteran shortstop market was beginning to move, and the Cardinals, I think, felt like they couldn't get boxed out of that, because if that back issue for Mason Wynn would have lingered, they would have been in trouble. So it was basically Brenden Crawford coming in as a $2 million insurance policy, instead of the Cardinals doing what a lot of teams would do and say, let's try this Thomas Saggese kid and see what he's capable of doing. Maybe he would be worthy of a spot. And if we're platooning guys anyway, because that's the way the game is going, we might as well trust that, Saggese, even though he is a young prospect a la Walker, he's going to get enough opportunities to make it make sense if he earns them. And he didn't have a great spring, but since then, Saggese's been looking pretty solid. 17 home runs. He's got a 739 OPS in AAA this season, and has been playing some shortstop and can do so capably enough, right? It's not an important role now that Mason Wynn seems to be on the other side of his back issue, knock on wood. Still something that I'm sure they're going to want to manage with him as time goes on. But he's the everyday shortstop, right? He's going to take an off day here and there, but it's not anything that necessitated an entire person to be clogging up a bench spot when you only get 4 of them anyway now in the era of the DH. So the Crawford thing just didn't make a lot of sense. You also have Carpenter on this team, which he at least is holding his own offensively. So that's why I don't bag on the Carpenter role nearly as much. He's got a league average OPS. OPS plus of 99 is just 1% below league average. And so he is a lefty bat off the bench that makes sense. Saggese would be that bat off the right side of the bench who can also play some shortstop, can fill in at second base, and to me would be the obvious fit. I think Ollie Marmol would love to have a guy like that on his bench. To this point, and even as the press release is announced today, you don't see Thomas Saggese's news, or his name, I should say, in that press release. It's because he's not called up to the team yet. Luken Baker is who comes up as sort of the other side of the Brenden Crawford move. And you can frame it however you want. If you want to pretend like it's Matt Carpenter coming up for the Crawford move and then Luken Baker coming up for Jordan Walker, whatever you want to do there, it doesn't really make a difference. Those are the 2 roster moves. They don't have a backup shortstop on the roster now. This role that was so important up until August 20th to make sure that you had, now they can get rid of it, and they don't even need to replenish it. They're not worried about it, at least for the time being. Maybe later on this week we see something different as it pertains to Saggese. And you might be thinking, well, why not Saggese now? Because there is an open 40-man spot. If you have they didn't designate Crawford for assignment because there's no assignment to give him. They're not going to send him to the minors, and you can't trade him at this point. We're post-trade deadline. So simply they release him, which is the only thing that you would do in this situation with a veteran of that status. But what's the deal? Like, why don't the Cardinals feel now that they need a backup shortstop? They waited all the way until late August, holding on for dear life to Brandon Crawford. Well, Brendan Donovan could play backup shortstop. I think he is the only person on this 26-man roster for Tuesday night's game that you could describe as such. There is an open 40-man spot. However, Steven Matz has been rehabbing, and he's actually pitching okay down in Memphis. The Cardinals, I think, are going to expect him to be back maybe after one more rehab start. I'm sure they're right now at Busch Stadium talking about this very thing as I prepare to do my 4 p.m. radio show, where on KTGR, the big show, we will talk more about this. So if you watch this video and want to go tune into the radio show, you can find us on the KTGR app. But that's sort of the way that this is playing out, where you got to be ready for Steven Matz to potentially come back and need his 40-man spot because he's on the 60-day injured list, which allows you to take him off the 40-man for the time being until his return. But once he returns, he'll need a spot. That's the Crawford spot that's been vacated. The problem is the Cardinals do this over and over again over the past handful of years under John Mozeliak. They are so reluctant to make 40-man moves during the season. And then when they make them, sometimes these players go unclaimed. Sometimes they do get claimed by other clubs, but you're not necessarily missing those players. And I'm not going to go down the list and tell you the players who aren't on the 26-man roster actively, but are on the 40-man and don't necessarily need to be because they don't seem to have much future utility for the big league Cardinals. But you could go Google it yourself and you'll find some names and go, oh yeah, if they happen to DFA that player, A, he might not even get claimed on waivers, so he could go right back to Memphis. B, even if he does get claimed on waivers, that's part of how you run a roster if you need to prioritize the big league club. Isn't that what the whole Jordan Walker thing was to, hey, it might not be the best thing for Walker, but it's going to help the big league club. We're going to need to have him on the big league roster just to be a platoon bat against left-handed pitching. Well, in the case of Sajacy, I think he could bring utility to the roster, playing multiple positions, a right-handed bat that might actually have a little bit of juice behind it, and you could call him up. You could call him up today. But that's the way that I look at it, is they have Sajacy available as somebody they could use. Instead, it's Luken Baker for right now, which does serve some utility. And it could get even more interesting if the Cardinals decide, hey, Goldie right now is not cutting it, so we are going to start to give some of his at-bats away to a Luken Baker and see if we can't catch fire with somebody who's got an 880 OPS in the minors this season and has also hit 32 home runs for AAA. So if that's part of the reason that it's Luken Baker instead, then that's all well and good. However, the Sajacy thing and the fact that the Cardinals prioritize the 40-man roster, and it's so vitally important that all these guys are on the 40-man roster up until the point that inevitably they are all DFA'd in November or put on waivers in November to make room for incoming free agent acquisitions, trades, etc. That has sort of been the blueprint in recent years for the St. Louis Cardinals. They hold on to these guys far too long. It's like they can't imagine what would happen, the embarrassment of somebody claiming them on waivers. And yet you can look down even beyond the 40-man roster. This organization from AAA up to the big leagues does not have good balance. They don't have any right-handed hitting outfielders that can do the job that Jordan Walker was called upon to do a week ago. And they're sitting here worrying about what some of these guys on the 40-man are what would happen if they end up getting designated for assignment, if they end up going on waivers and getting claimed. It's a backwards way of thinking from this Cardinals organization. It's been more commonplace from Mozeliak's front office in recent years. We will see if this is a sign of things to come in terms of now the Cardinals are going to be a little more sensible with their roster management, have a little bit more urgency. But this just feels like one of those days where they're cleaning up some things that arguably either never should have happened in the first place with regard to Walker or should have been cleaned up prior to August 20th so that this Cardinals team could have perhaps had a little bit more of an edge and a chance prior to today, where they begin play 2 games below 500 and 11 back of the Milwaukee Brewers that they will face tonight at Busch Stadium. Those are my thoughts. I got to get out of here because I am about to start my radio show on KTGR. But let me know in the comments what you think about the roster moves today. We'll try to have a B-Schaeff daily later on tonight. I have been prioritizing my fantasy football stuff a little bit more as I am desperately trying to get to 1,000 subs on that channel. So I'll drop that link below if you guys would so kindly subscribe to that. I can then get back to the focus on the Cardinal stuff, even a little bit more on YouTube than I have been doing. But we've kept putting up content anyway, so appreciate you guys for your support, and we'll talk to you a little bit later on the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals Writer channel. Peace.